former Liberal Democrat Minister Norman Baker and former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall. Welcome back, both of you. Norman, you want to talk about this extraordinary... Is it an interview or was he speaking in the Commons? George Eustace, a former government minister, saying that the UK's trade deal with Australia is not good for the UK.
No, this is in the Mail. It's not quite clear where he said this, actually, or maybe he just spoke to the journalist, but he called... he accused Liz Truss of shattering, so what he used, the UK's negotiating position to get a trade deal. And of course the background to this is that we, after Brexit, we lost our close relations with our closest trading partners, 4% drop in GDP as a consequence. The government was desperate to show it was global Britain to sign up some trade deals with other countries. Australia was first in line, and what he seemed to be saying was that Liz Truss was so desperate in their role as International Trade Secretary to get a deal that she basically set a tight deadline, which then let the Australians dictate the terms. And George Eustace at the time was the Environment and Farming Minister, and there was a great deal of concern from the farming community that they were being sold down the river by this deal.
Yeah, no surprise then that he said the best bits were negotiated by DEFRA, the worst bits by the Department for Trade. But some of this language he's using about this trade deal, overall the truth of the matter, the UK gave away far too much for too little in return. We did not actually need to give Australia or New Zealand full liberalisation of beef and sheep. It's not in our economic interests to do so.
Well, I think he's absolutely right on that, and I think the whole basis of the promises made were that we weren't going to damage our farming community, we weren't going to minimise the animal welfare protections we got in this country, and that appears to be what we've done by signing this deal.
I want to get Claire's take on this, though. It's interesting that this is all being pinned on Liz Truss. I mean, obviously it was her portfolio at the time, but, you know, she's part of a cabinet. She's under Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. I mean, he was very much driving this desire for a deal post-Brexit, wasn't he? I mean, is George Eustace speaking out of turn by laying the blame all on Liz Truss's shoulders?
I think this just plays into how divided the Conservative Party still is, and George Eustace doesn't have a job. So I think there's a certain level of anger there, and he did say it in the House of Commons. So he did say it on the floor of the House of Commons, and he's sort of laying bare this civil war that still rages on. But you're right, Boris Johnson was Prime Minister at the time. I believe that between himself and Liz Truss, they wanted to have this wrapped up by the time of the G7 summit, as it was then. They wanted to rush this through so they had something good to put out there. So I think perhaps the details a little lacking. It was put together very, very quickly. But I think what's more concerning is that you are seeing former ministers coming out now and laying out quite the disagreements that they have with the previous incumbents of Number 10. And that's a worrying thing. I thought we were supposed to be banding together and be in a proper grown-up government, but it doesn't appear to be. And I think that he is right with what he says. I don't think that he should really go out there and say it.
Okay. Interesting. Actually, Claire, what were you wanted page 8 of the Daily Mail, potholes.
You see, now this is the one thing that will unite everybody, their hatred for potholes. And I think the problem is with the weather at the moment, the particularly bad rainy weather that we've had has caused more potholes. And the problem is fixing them. And with councils, as we stated earlier, going into such severe financial turmoil, they may not have the money to fix the roads. So you're looking at the headline here was damaging 225 more cars per day. If you think that that's quite a proportion of cars on the road.
We're all going to need four-wheel drive, aren't we?
We're going to need something, but I think we also need our roads not to fall apart at any sign of weather.
Yeah.
You know, in this country, we're not very good with extremes of heat, with extremes of cold, with extremes of rain, wind, you name it. So why our roads are in such a poor state to begin with?
Well, with more extreme weather, surely that means there will need to be more investment in roads.
And who's going to bring that in?
Well, a pothole has appeared. The council's looking into it, as the old saying goes. This is actually quite serious with the councils, because if there are cars being damaged, they can sue the council for failure to maintain the roads, and it could actually cost the councils more money in paying out to drivers than it does to maintain the roads in the first place. Speaking as a former transport minister with these matters on my in tray, you know, what many councils do is to patch and mend very cheaply, because that's all the money they've got. They mend the pothole, and within 3 weeks it's reappear because it mended it properly.
Yeah.
So this is the situation is getting worse and worse and worse. We actually had in my time a pothole handout to councils trying to catch up with some of the damage that's been done. But if you look at the condition of roads in England, they're very poor now compared to how they used to be, and they're getting worse in local roads. The trunk roads, which are a government responsibility, are by and large very good condition, but the local roads are getting worse and worse.
Yeah, it feels like a metaphor, doesn't it, for Britain in 2022, the state of the roads. Norma, should we talk about Rupert Murdoch? He's giving truth-telling to Donald Trump. What's he saying? How has this been covered in the Eye?
He's saying that your White House dream is over. I'm not backing you in the next election if you want to stand. And of course, Trump is supposed to be making what he calls a very big announcement tonight, which presumably means he is going to put himself forward. And Murdoch is saying, I'm not going to back you, I'll back Ron DeSantis if he stands, and I might even back a Democrat if you're the candidate. No, I can understand that in a sense, because Trump, in my view, is damaged goods, and he shouldn't be allowed back anywhere near the White House after the riots on January the 6th. However, what annoys me is the idea that this 90-plus-year-old Australian can dictate to people whether or not they can be president or prime minister.
Does he need him?
Well, you may need him because they do a lot of damage. You think about the headlines in The Sun over the years, which have been, the last person in Britain turned out the lights when Neil Kinnock was a candidate, for example. I mean, the newspapers in this country, many of the newspapers, don't report the news, they report the views of the proprietors, the editors, and they skew the news accordingly. And you saw on some of the papers a few weeks ago how they were saying that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were fantastic, these were the tax cuts you wanted. Now they're all saying how fantastic it is that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt are following a Thatcherite policy. There's been as one of my friends said, actually, who works on one of the papers, they've got the memory of a goldfish and the morals of a scoundrel.
Yeah. Claire, Donald Trump is very popular with the grassroots Republicans, maybe not so much with his party at the moment, or even with the media, with the mainstream media, but the grassroots Republicans love him. Do you?
I'm not a great fan. I've never have been. I think that it was an interesting experiment for the United States. I think they needed something to shake up their politics, but perhaps not somebody quite as divisive as Donald Trump. And I think it is important to have somebody like Rupert Murdoch. It's not just the newspapers within the United Kingdom, but of course the media frenzy that is in the United States, which plays a huge part in getting somebody elected. If you look at the likes of Fox News, who are very, very pro-Trump, if Murdoch starts turning off the taps to that, then your outlets are going to be very, very limited. I think Donald Trump is probably hedging his bets a little bit with 24. You can float it out there, see what people think. But the Republicans don't have anybody else that would really get that level of support in the United States that he does.
You don't think DeSantis could be that person? Because you could already see that Trump feels threatened by DeSantis because he's already started attacking him.
He does, but there are a lot of people who still think that Donald Trump had that election stolen from him, and I'm not sure that they
But most of the candidates, in fact, almost all of the candidates who ran last week on the belief that the election was stolen didn't win, which is a resounding rejection of Trumpism from across the electorate, from within the Republicans as well.
Well, absolutely, and that's quite an interesting thing to have a look at, and this is why it'll be interesting to see what he says tonight and how he says it. It may be a case of, I love you all, but no, I can't do this, I need to hand over to somebody else, and he gives that endorsement. It's going to be the Donald Trump show, whatever he says, and we're all going to be talking about it for at least the next 48 hours, which is what he always wants.
And one of the benefits of this country as opposed to America is that the newspapers can say what they want, and they can take whatever lines they want, but the broadcast media, including GBNEWS, has to be balanced by law. And if it's not balanced by law, then Ofcom will come in and shut you down, as it did with Press TV, the Iranian-backed television. That's not the case to America, as Claire says, with Fox TV, which is biased beyond belief in favour of Trump, or has been. You wouldn't go away with that over here.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite right. Thank you for pointing that out. Claire, shall we talk about a story that is terrible to snigger? We were having a bit of a snigger in the advert break about this increase in demand for sexual health advice in the over 65s. Why not? Lots of these people coming out of long-term relationships and rediscovering their sex lives. This is in The Guardian, page 6.
And I think we can't deny people are living longer. We're not talking about some very, very old people, as we were talking about in the advert break, but these are people in the prime of their life. And quite interestingly and quite worryingly is the increase in STIs, a 20% increase. And you kind of think of an older generation, you should know better to put yourself at that kind of level of risk of getting an STI. But it just shows how our life is evolving, and I think it's always an interesting way to look at it. When I was younger, I used to think somebody of 30 was ancient and past it, and then when you get to that age, you realise that that's not quite so
isn't
true.
it?
And I think we need to not be quite so sniggery as we have been.
Yeah, well,
because these people are at the prime of their life.
I was going to say we'll be 65 before we know it, and then I look to you, Norman. But we were...
65. And I always think people who are about 10 years older than whatever age I am are past it, but that goes up over time.
Yeah, it's all relative, isn't it?
It's all relative.
It's all relative. And actually, Norman, page 8 to 9 of the Sun, LGBTQ jet for Qatar trip. Pride of Lions. What's this all about?
Well, this is an interesting idea that the England football team has decided to fly into Qatar in a plane which is a rainbow plane, deliberately making a sort of pro-LGBT point that the rights of gay people should be respected. Now, the interesting thing here, I mean, first of all, I think Qatar is way out of line with Western values on these matters, but the issue is whether or not we have the right to expect to carry on in a foreign country the way we would do at home, or whether we should respect the laws in that country. And when I was in Saudi Arabia, for example, there are no Christians or no Christians openly worshipping, and you couldn't have a Christian church, and you had to go to the mosque, or that was it. But over here, of course, we got mosques as well as churches, which I think is fine, because people should be allowed to be free with their religion. So should we respect that view that Qatar has set down, although we disagree with it ourselves, or should we say no, we don't accept that, we're going to make a protest while we're over there, which is what the England team's doing by using
They do adhere to Sharia law in Qatar, don't they? And homosexuality is illegal.
You can get the death penalty for it.
So yeah, I get it. So you were talking about Western values. They're Western values because they're in the West. These are not Qatar.
That's right. So the issue is whether or not our Western values in a sense are universal, or whether we should abandon them, as James cleverly appears to say, the Foreign Secretary, when we go over there and not talk about it. It's a hard job for him, of course, being at the World Cup, isn't it?
Yeah, on a technical point, I think that was a picture that, I don't know if that was an actual picture of the jet that we got up.
I couldn't see a rainbow. I was looking for a rainbow.
I couldn't see a rainbow either.
It's called the rainbow.
It's called the rainbow.
It's called the rainbow. It's not going to have a
rainbow on it. It's
well done for clarifying that,
Oh.
Claire. Thank you. Let's end on this lovely story. Absolutely the highlight of the morning. Nice one to end on as well. Inside the Sun, Claire. And this is right up my sort of thing my son would do. Tell us the story.
This is a boy of 9 who managed to trick his dad into buying a puppy after taking his mum's phone and impersonating her in a bunch of WhatsApp messages.
Genius.
And I just think this is absolutely brilliant, because he was using words that he thought that his mum would use to his dad, and obviously worked because his father then did get the puppy, but he's been using things like hi hun and love and putting little X's at the end of messages. And it ends with the father saying, I'm definitely going to talk to my wife in the future. Maybe we'll set up a code word. And you think, when you're having that kind of discussion, that we all send messages all of the time, but actually a phone call sometimes wouldn't go amiss if it's something like this. But they've got themselves an 18-month-old Cocker Spaniel to join their family. So this little lad, Noah, I think deserves some proper brownie points.
Yeah.
That was a pretty
Hang on,
He's very clever.
Hang on, so he deceived his dad, and his dad did buy him the puppy anyway.
It does say something for the dad's not perhaps thinking that through. The family had discussed previously getting another dog. They already have one. They were talking about getting another one, and this rescue dog appeared, and they were discussing it. It wasn't just a spur of the moment purchase, but I think it does show the difference between women and men. The mum wanted to think about it a little bit further, but dad just went, oh, actually, no, I'll go ahead and do it. And it was the one message, Kev, just get one. Kids are crying. And that was enough for the dad, and then off he went.
It's not a great headline, though, in the Sun, sells the dad a pup.
Yeah, it works on many levels.
It does. It's a great headline.
Yeah.
Genius. Claire Pearsall, Norman Baker, thank you. It's been a pleasure, as always. See you again soon.